Week 5. The Long Days. Galway Workhouse, late November 1847. Maureen soon discovered that life in the workhouse was not measured by weeks or months. It was measured by routine. The same bell, the same prayers, the same meals, the same work, the same exhaustion. Only the faces changed. Every few days another bed became empty. Every few days another frightened face appeared to fill it. The workhouse was forever saying goodbye and forever saying hello. The first bell sounded at 5 o'clock. The girls rose immediately. Anyone who lingered risked punishment. The beds had to be made with military precision. Blankets folded, straw mattresses shaken, every corner inspected. Mrs. Hanley expected discipline, not because she enjoyed enforcing it, because nearly 500 people lived within the Galway workhouse, and without routine the place would descend into chaos. Even so, chaos often found its own way inside. After prayers came breakfast. The meal never varied very much, a bowl of stirabout. Sometimes coarse Indian meal porridge, occasionally a small piece of bread. The older girls joked that if someone blindfolded them, they could still tell what day of the week it was by how watery the porridge appeared to be. Nobody laughed very hard, it was too close to the truth. The work assignments were posted every Monday morning. Girls capable of sewing repaired clothing until their fingers bled from pushing needles through coarse cloth. Others scrubbed corridors with stiff brushes. Some worked in the laundry, where steam soaked every thread of clothing they owned. The youngest peeled endless piles of turnips or carried water from the pumps. The strongest girls broke stones for repairs around the grounds or helped in the garden whenever there was work to be done. There was little idle time. The Poor Law Commissioners believed hard work built character. The girls often thought it merely built hunger. One afternoon, Maureen was assigned to the oakum room. She'd never heard the word before arriving at the workhouse. An elderly instructor emptied several coils of old tarred rope onto a wooden floor table. Separate the fibres. She demonstrated with fingers that had become permanently blackened by years of tar. The work looked simple. It was not. The ropes had to be teased apart strand by strand until only loose fibres remained. Those fibres would later be used for caulking ships. The tar coated Maureen's fingertips. Tiny splinters lodged beneath her nails. Within an hour her fingers were sore. By evening they were bleeding. She looked around the room. Nearly every pair of hands told the same story. Ellen sat opposite her. It gets easier. Maureen looked at her blistered fingers. Doesn't seem likely. Ellen smiled. It doesn't. They both laughed quietly. It was only a small laugh, but in the oakum room, even that sounded almost rebellious. School lessons were offered for the younger children, several afternoons each week. Many arrived unable to read or write. Some had never held a book. Maureen had learned her letters from her father during winter's evenings, beside the fire before the famine. Tig had believed that even a tenant farmer's daughter should know how to read a Bible and write her own name. Those evenings now seemed to belong to another lifetime. The schoolroom itself was cold but orderly. Its teacher, Miss Catherine Walsh, was one of the few adults who seemed to speak to children as though they were still children. She insisted they read aloud. She corrected gently. She praised often. One afternoon she paused beside Maureen's desk. "You read well." "My father taught me." "He must have been proud." Maureen looked down at the page. "I hope he was." Miss Walsh rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. "I'm sure he was." No more was said. None needed to be. The workhouse remained desperately overcrowded. Every available corner seemed occupied. Families continued arriving almost daily. Many had walked for days. Some had carried children who never reached the gate alive. The fever wards remained full. The laundry overflowed. The kitchens struggled to prepare enough food. The dormitories grew more crowded every week. Disease required little invitation. Measles, typhus, dysentery, relapsing fever. Names that Maureen had scarcely heard before the famine now became part of everyday conversation. Whenever someone coughed, nearby girls instinctively edged away, not from unkindness, from fear. One evening Ellen failed to appear for supper. Maureen searched the dining hall, then the dormitory. Finally she found Mrs. Hanley. "Where's Ellen?" The matron looked tired. "In the infirmary." "Is she very ill?" "We hope not." Hope. Maureen had learned that within the workhouse hope was a careful word. People used it because certainty was too dangerous. The following afternoon, Miss Walsh found Maureen sitting alone during the recreation period, if it could be called recreation. The girls were merely allowed into the yard for fresh air. There were no games, no toys, only walking, thinking, waiting. Miss Walsh sat beside her on the low stone wall. "You've been quiet." "Ellen's sick." "Yes." Maureen looked toward the infirmary building. "So were my father." A pause. "My mother." Another. "My sister." Miss Walsh nodded. "I know." "I don't want Ellen to go there too." The teacher folded her hands together. "You know," she smiled sadly, "when I was your age, I thought growing older meant learning answers." Maureen looked at her. "It doesn't." "What does it mean then?" "It means learning how to keep going when there aren't any." For a while they watched the autumn leaves blowing across the yard, and finally Miss Walsh spoke again. "You've something your father gave you." Maureen frowned. "I've nothing left." "You can read." She looked surprised. "Yes." "Many here cannot." She smiled. "That's something famine couldn't take from you." That night, lying awake, Maureen thought about those words. She'd lost her home, her parents, Patricia, and almost every possession she'd ever owned. But her father had left her something no hunger could consume, the ability to read, the ability to learn. She wondered for the first time, perhaps that might one day matter. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows of the orphan ward. Inside, another bell echoed through the corridors as attendants hurried toward the infirmary. Someone else had taken a turn for the worse. The workhouse never truly slept. It merely waited for the next emergency. And every child within its walls learned the same lesson sooner or later. Morning was never promised, only the bell. Week 6, Whispers in the Dark. Galway Workhouse, December 1847. By December, Maureen no longer counted the days. Instead, she counted the people who had disappeared. Some recovered and left the workhouse, many did not. The empty beds were quickly filled by new arrivals, their frightened faces almost identical to those who had occupied them only days before. The workhouse seemed to consume lives as quickly as the famine delivered them. Ellen recovered from her illness. When she returned to the orphan ward, thinner than before but smiling, Maureen embraced her without thinking. "I thought I'd lost you." Ellen laughed quietly. "It'll take more than a fever." "It nearly did. It nearly does for all of us." The laughter faded. Neither girl needed reminding how many had entered the infirmary and never returned. Life settled once again into its relentless rhythm. Oakum, laundry, prayers, meals, sleep, repeat. Yet beneath that routine another life existed, one built on whispered warnings, silent understandings, and unwritten rules. It was the older girls who taught them. Never leave bread unattended, never argue with the kitchen women, never volunteer information, and never, ever find yourself alone after dark. The warning puzzled Maureen until one evening. She had been delayed folding blankets after prayers, and by the time she finished, the corridor outside the linen room was almost empty. She hurried towards the orphan ward. Halfway she heard footsteps behind her, slow, measured. She walked faster, so did the footsteps. A man's voice came softly behind her. "You're late." She turned. One of the assistant porters stood smiling. He was perhaps 30 years old. She had seen him before, but never spoken to him. "You should be in your ward." "I'm going there. No need to rush." He stepped a little closer. "You've grown." Maureen frowned. "I beg your pardon?" "I remember when you arrived." He smiled again. "You've become quite the young lady." She felt something tighten inside her, not fear, instinct. Without answering, she hurried past him. He didn't stop her, but she felt his eyes upon her until she turned the corner. When she reached the dormitory, Ellen immediately asked, "What happened?" Maureen told her. Ellen's expression darkened. "Which porter?" Maureen described him. Ellen sighed. "I thought so." "Who is he?" "His name's Collins." "Is he dangerous?" Ellen looked around to make certain no one was listening. "He knows exactly how close to the line he can walk." "I don't understand." "He never touches a girl where witnesses can see." The words chilled Maureen. "But he'll corner them. He'll talk. He'll make them uncomfortable. And if they complain?" Ellen shrugged. "Who believes an orphan over a member of staff?" Maureen suddenly felt sick. Does Mrs. Hanley know? I think she suspects. Then why? Because suspicion isn't proof. It was the first time Maureen truly understood how vulnerable they all were. Not because they were hungry, not only because they had no families, because they had no one outside these walls who would come looking after them. No father to demand answers, no mother to notice tears, no brother to offer protection. They belonged to the workhouse, and in many people's eyes, to no one else. A few days later, Ellen introduced Maureen to another orphan. This is Nora. The other girl looked up from the shirt she was mending, Nora Flaherty. She smiled warmly. You must be Maureen. She was 16, tall despite the famine, dark-haired with kind grey eyes that still held traces of the young woman she might have become had Ireland not begun starving. Unlike many of the girls, Nora spoke with quiet confidence. She had entered the workhouse nearly a year earlier after both her parents died of fever. You've been here that long? Nora nodded. Long enough to know every crack in these walls. Maureen smiled. Then perhaps you can tell me how to escape them. Nora's smile faded. If I ever find the answer, she glanced through the high windows, I'll tell you. Over the following weeks, the three girls became inseparable. They worked together whenever possible, shared stories during the brief recreation periods. At night they whispered about the lives they had once lived. Nora remembered a small holding near Clifton. Ellen spoke of a fishing family from Connemara. Maureen described the little stream behind her father's cottage. Together they rebuilt, in words alone, homes that no longer existed. One afternoon, rumours began spreading through the orphan ward. A ship. Australia. Young women wanted. Some laughed. Others dismissed it as nonsense. The workhouse was full of rumours. Most disappeared as quickly as they arrived. But Nora listened carefully. I've heard this before. You have? She nodded. One of the nurses mentioned government people looking for orphan girls. For what? Domestic servants. In Australia. Ellen frowned. That's halfway around the world. So they say. Would you go? Nora looked out the window. If it meant never seeing another workhouse again. She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. That afternoon after prayers, Nora confessed something she had never told anyone. I nearly had a place once. What happened? Maureen asked. A family in Galway wanted a servant. Why didn't they take you? Nora hesitated. They asked questions. What kind? Questions about me. She looked down at her hands. There was gossip. What gossip? Nora smiled sadly. In a workhouse, gossip grows faster than weeds. Ellen reached across and squeezed her hand. You've done nothing wrong. I know. But sometimes knowing isn't enough. She looked toward the ceiling. When people have no family left to speak for them, her voice became almost a whisper. Other people write their story instead. Later that night, Maureen awoke to muffled crying. She found Nora sitting beside one of the dormitory windows. Moonlight reflected from the frost outside. You couldn't sleep? Nora shook her head. I'm afraid. Of Australia? No. Then what? Nora looked directly at her. I'm afraid they'll never let me leave here. Maureen sat beside her. They'd be foolish not to. Nora laughed softly. You still think the world's fair? No. I stopped believing that when my father died. Nora nodded. Good. Then, after a long silence, she added quietly, but don't ever stop believing it could be. Before dawn, the bell rang again. Another child had died during the night. As the girls filed silently toward morning prayers, Maureen looked at Nora walking ahead of her. Strong, kind, protective. Someone who had become almost like the older sister she had lost. She could not know that within a few weeks the two of them would stand side by side before a panel of strangers. One would be offered a new life on the other side of the world. The other would leave the workhouse forever. Not because she had been chosen, but because she had been judged. And in the Ireland of 1847, the judgment of respectable people could become a life sentence for a girl with no one left to defend her.